October 1793. Paris trembles beneath a gray, endless sky. The air smells of smoke and rain. From the narrow windows of the Conciergerie prison, the Seine moves dark and heavy, like a silent funeral procession. Inside, a woman once called the Queen of France sits upon a straw mattress. Her gown, plain, her hair white before its time. Her name, no longer Marie Antoinette, but prisoner number 280. History remembers her execution, but before that day, they destroyed her spirit in ways no blade ever could. The calm before her fall was not calm at all. By the year 1793, France had become a nation on edge, trembling between liberty and chaos. The revolution had begun with promises: equality, freedom, fraternity. But promises can rot when hunger and fear take hold. And in that decay, the people found their villain, the woman they blamed for everything that had gone wrong. Marie Antoinette, daughter of the Austrian Empress, Queen of France, now the face of their hatred, her every word twisted into cruelty, her every gesture mocked in pamphlets, burned in effigy. She had once been adored, painted in silk and gold. Now she was called Madame Deficit, the symbol of royal greed. But hatred is never satisfied with words alone. It needs to see suffering. It needs to humiliate before it kills. They took her first to the Temple prison. Then, when the king was executed, to the Conciergerie, known across Paris as the antechamber of death. Her cell was small, 12 feet long, damp stone walls, straw for a bed, a single barred window above eye level, leaking pale light that never reached the corners. At night, rats crawled through the straw. 2 guards sat inside the cell, always watching, never speaking softly. Even when she slept, they were ordered to stare. This was not punishment for a crime. It was the dismantling of a human being. Before they took her crown, they took her privacy. Before they took her life, they took her name. Marie Antoinette became prisoner 280, a number, a shadow of herself. They wanted France to see her not as a woman, but as a warning. At Versailles, only a few years earlier, she had been surrounded by gold, mirrors, orchestras. Every morning, nobles waited to hand her a comb, a ribbon, a gown. She was the center of ceremony, the sun around which France revolved. Now, she was invisible, her perfume replaced by the stench of mildew and despair, the music replaced by the scrape of chains and the echo of water dripping from the ceiling. In her diary, she began to write only one word, over and over. Nothing. Nothing for the day, nothing to say, nothing left. Historians have argued over that word for centuries. Was it surrender or defiance? Maybe it was both, because sometimes silence is the last act of control a prisoner has. Outside her cell, the revolution burned like a fever. The Committee of Public Safety hunted enemies everywhere, priests, nobles, even their own. Every dawn, the carts rolled through the streets, carrying the condemned to the guillotine, and every morning, Marie heard them, the wheels creaking, the distant cheers of the crowd, the dull thud that ended another name. She would close her eyes and whisper her children's names instead. That was her rebellion, small, invisible, but hers. The guards, hardened men, were told to despise her. Some obeyed. Others secretly pitied her. One guard later confessed that he once saw her praying by the window, whispering softly to herself. And in her voice he said, "I heard not a queen, but a mother." That moment haunted him for the rest of his life. Outside, the city starved. Rumors filled the air like smoke. One of them, the most famous lie of all, "Let them eat cake." Marie never said those words, but history does not always need truth. It needs symbols. And so the myth lived, while the woman beneath it faded. To the people, she became every hunger, every debt, every dead child in France. And when fear becomes hunger, and hunger becomes rage, mercy disappears. And so, she waited, in a cell that smelled of damp straw and rust. Each breath, another borrowed second. Each night, another rehearsal for the end. They had already taken everything she owned. Now they were taking what she believed she was. Her crown was gone, her throne was gone, her children were gone. But somehow, she remained. History often begins with noise, battles, speeches, revolutions. But before every storm, there is silence. And in that silence, a woman once called the Queen of France waited for her name to be called for the last time. October 14th, 1793. The air inside the conciergerie is thick with the smell of sweat, ink, and fear. At dawn, a guard unlocks the heavy cell door. "The trial begins today," he mutters. For months, Marie Antoinette had waited in silence. Now, history had come to collect its debt. She was led through narrow corridors toward the Revolutionary Tribunal, a dark wooden chamber lit by smoky oil lamps. The crowd pressed close, eyes burning with fury. Some came to see justice, others came to see vengeance. To them, she was not a widow, not a prisoner, not even a human being. She was the last ghost of monarchy, the final obstacle to their new world. And in that chamber, they would tear her apart, piece by piece, with words instead of weapons. The trial was never meant to find truth. It was meant to confirm guilt. Fouquier-Tinville, the public prosecutor, stood like a blade. He accused her of conspiring with foreign powers, of draining France's treasury, of betraying her people. Each charge was met with laughter from the gallery, each denial with jeers. The men on the jury already knew their verdict, but they wanted a show. They even attacked her as a mother. They claimed she had corrupted her son, the young Dauphin, by teaching him royal arrogance. When this failed to enrage the crowd enough, one witness, a revolutionary zealot, made a monstrous accusation. He claimed she had committed unspeakable acts with her own child. Even her enemies fell silent at those words. Marie did not scream. She did not cry. She rose slowly from her chair, her chains rattling against the wooden floor. Then she turned to the women in the crowd and said, "If I have not answered, it is because nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge against a mother." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. For the first time in months, the people saw her not as a monster, but as a mother. In that moment, the mask cracked. Even the revolution's hatred hesitated. It was brief, but real. That quiet defiance was her last act of power. In that courtroom, stripped of jewels and titles, she stood taller than the men who judged her. Outside the tribunal, Paris trembled. The reign of terror was in full swing. Every day, more heads fell. Revolutionaries executed revolutionaries. Even the architect of the guillotine, Dr. Guillotin himself, began to fear it. Bread was scarce, gold was gone, and still, the people came to see the trials. It was their theater, their dark salvation, and Marie Antoinette was their grand finale. The evidence against her was paper thin, letters without signatures, rumors carried by paid witnesses. The verdict, of course, was written before the trial even began. But the spectacle had to feel righteous. The Republic needed to look pure, even while it drowned in blood. So they kept her on the stand for 16 hours. No food, no rest, no reprieve. When she faltered, they laughed. When she spoke, they interrupted. When she remained silent, they called it guilt. Yet beneath that cruelty, something unbroken remained. Marie had once ruled a palace where silence was forbidden, where every meal, every laugh, every whisper had been part of a ritual. But in that courtroom, her silence became sacred. She learned that dignity, not diamonds, was the final luxury of the condemned. And she wore it like a crown no one could steal. Few people understand the brutality of those trials. The accused were rarely given lawyers. They were shouted at, insulted, drowned in accusation. The judges were puppets. The verdict, always death. In revolutionary France, the guillotine was seen as equal, swift, merciful. It did not discriminate by birth. It was the people's justice, pure, mechanical, and unfeeling. But to Marie Antoinette, it was not justice. It was revenge, dressed in reason. As the tribunal ended, Fouquier-Tinville declared, "Marie Antoinette, widow of Louis Capet, you have conspired against the liberty of the nation. The sentence is death." She nodded once. No tears, no plea. Just a quiet breath, like a candle being blown out. That night she returned to her cell. The guards whispered about what they had seen. Some said her face seemed calm, almost serene. Others said her eyes were distant, as if she was already halfway gone. In the silence, she removed her shawl, folded it neatly, and sat down. She wrote her final letter, not of anger, but of love, to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. It was a mother's letter. It spoke of her children, of forgiveness, of faith. The letter was never delivered. It was intercepted, hidden in archives, and discovered years later, the last words of a woman the world had already forgotten. The next morning, they came for her again. This time, not for trial, for judgment. She would wear a simple white dress, no jewels, no crown, no escort, but a cart and a crowd. As she looked out the barred window toward the dawn, she whispered one final prayer. "May God forgive them, for they know not what they do." The revolution believed it had won, but what it destroyed in that chamber was not just a queen. It was its own reflection, the part that still remembered mercy. The blade would come soon, but her true breaking point had already passed. And strangely, she did not break. October 16th, 1793. Paris awakens beneath a pale, colorless sky. In the damp corridors of the conciergerie, footsteps echo like the ticking of a clock that has almost reached its end. Marie Antoinette has not slept. For hours, she has sat upright on a wooden stool, her hands clasped, her lips moving silently in prayer. Her hair, once powdered and styled like a crown, is now streaked with gray. Her eyes, hollow yet unbroken, reflect the candle's flickering light. At dawn, the door opens. A soldier steps in, his uniform worn, his voice uneasy. "It is time," he says. She nods once and rises. No tremor in her movement, only stillness, the kind that comes when fear has burned itself out. They bring her a plain white dress, no velvet, no gold, only linen, the fabric of the poor. It was the Republic's decree. The queen must die as a commoner. As she dresses, she pauses to untangle a small lock of hair. Once, ladies of the court had competed to copy her style. Now she cuts it away, a final offering to the executioner's blade. The sound of scissors in the cell is small, almost tender, like the sound of memory being severed. When the door opens again, she is no longer Her Majesty. She is simply Prisoner 280. But there is something in her bearing that refuses to vanish. Even the guards, hardened by months of blood, lower their gaze as she passes. The jailer whispers to another, "She walks like she's going to church." And in a way, she is. Outside, the city trembles with noise. Drums roll in the distance, vendors shout, horses stamp, and a cold wind sweeps down the Seine. The people know today's name. They whisper it as if it were a holiday. They have come to see the queen die. 2 gendarmes escort her to a wooden cart. It is small, splintered, and open, a deliberate humiliation. No carriage of dignity, as her husband once had. No veiled procession. They tie her hands behind her back. The rope bites into her wrists. She winces once but makes no sound. As she steps onto the cart, she glances toward the sky, gray, indifferent, infinite. The journey to the Place de la Révolution begins. 2 miles through narrow, jeering streets, from the Palais de Justice to the Tuileries, from the river to the guillotine. Thousands line the roads. Children shout insults they do not understand. Old women spit. Men wave red flags, chanting, "Vive la République!" But amid the chaos, some faces remain still. A few weep quietly. Others turn away, unable to watch. For they know the revolution devours its own. Years later, one witness, Jacques Hébert, would write, "She did not cry, she did not plead. She looked at us all as if she pitied us." Even her enemies, for a moment, saw not a tyrant, but a woman who had lost everything, her crown, her children, her world. As the cart rattles forward, the streets blur. She passes the ruins of the Tuileries Palace, once her home, now a shell. She glimpses the balcony where her children once waved to the crowd. They are gone now, her son taken, her daughter imprisoned. No mother should die without knowing where her children are. But she does. And still, she keeps her back straight. A young priest walks beside the cart, the only companion allowed. He murmurs words of comfort. "Your Majesty," he begins, but she gently interrupts. "Call me Marie Antoinette. I have ceased to be queen." He lowers his head. Then, quietly, she adds, "Pray with me." And so they do, through the clatter of wheels, through the shouting of the crowd, through the city that once crowned her and now condemns her. When the cart reaches the square, a sea of faces stretches endlessly. The guillotine stands tall at its center, red-stained wood against a gray October sky. It creaks softly as the blade glints in the light. The same platform where her husband died months earlier. The same drumbeat, the same cry. "Vive la République!" Only this time it is quieter. Even the mob senses something final. The guards help her down. Her feet tremble slightly as she steps onto the scaffold. The crowd presses closer. Someone shouts an insult, another laughs, but their voices fade as she turns to face them. There is a strange silence. And in that silence, Marie Antoinette speaks her last words. "Pardon me, monsieur. I did not mean to do it." She had stepped accidentally on the executioner's foot. Even at the edge of death, she apologized. It is perhaps the most human moment of the entire revolution. The executioner fastens her to the board. The drum roll begins. The crowd holds its breath. The blade rises, trembling in the light. Then, with a single strike, the age of kings ends. The crowd erupts. Some cheer, some cry, some simply walk away. And as her blood touches the wood, Paris exhales, a sound both relieved and broken. They buried her body in an unmarked grave at the Madeleine Cemetery. No cross, no name, no flowers. Years later, when France sought to erase its guilt, they dug up her remains and gave her a royal tomb. But monuments cannot erase what men once did in rage. Her death was not the end of tyranny. It was the proof that cruelty wears many crowns. And as the sun set that evening, the revolution realized, too late, that it had killed its last queen, but not its hunger for blood. The crowd dispersed slowly. The drums stopped. And for the first time in months, Paris was silent. The blade had fallen. The queen was gone. But the revolution, the machine that had devoured her, was far from finished. In the hours after Marie Antoinette's death, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Bakers reopened their stalls. Children played by the river. But beneath that fragile calm, something had shifted, something no one could name. A chill hung over the city. The same people who once cheered now avoided speaking her name. Even the executioners washed their hands longer than usual, as if the blood clung to them in ways water couldn't reach. The revolution had promised liberty, equality, fraternity. But on that October morning, it had also proven how quickly a dream could turn to vengeance. Robespierre called it justice. Others called it necessary. Yet among the citizens, a quiet doubt began to spread. If a queen could die like this, who was safe? In the conciergerie, her cell remained untouched for days. The chair she had sat on, the candle she had prayed beside, even the scissors that had cut her hair, all left exactly as they were. Some guards refused to enter, saying they heard her footsteps at night. Superstition, perhaps, or maybe guilt has its own kind of haunting. Her few belongings were cataloged and sold: a comb, a kerchief, a pair of worn shoes. To most, they were worthless, but to others, they became relics. Fragments of a woman who had once ruled the world of fashion, now reduced to a line in an inventory ledger. Her wedding ring was taken by a soldier. Years later, his granddaughter would sell it to pay for bread. History, it seems, eats its own souvenirs. In Vienna, her brother, Emperor Francis II, received the news days later. He said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, he whispered, "May God forgive them." He never spoke her name again. The French newspapers announced her death not with sympathy, but with satisfaction. They described her as the widow Capet, the traitor, the foreigner. Her last words, the simple apology to her executioner, were twisted into mockery. To the revolutionaries, she was the symbol of everything that had to die for France to be reborn. But symbols are dangerous things. They rarely die cleanly. In the weeks that followed, Parisians began to whisper of strange omens. The Seine ran red at sunset. A white dove was found dead near the guillotine. And some said that on quiet nights the bells of the Tuileries rang on their own. Perhaps it was nothing, or perhaps guilt, once awakened, echoes louder than truth. But the most haunting aftermath was not in Paris. It was in her children. Her son, Louis Charles, only 8 years old, was taken from her before the trial. He was placed in a cold, windowless cell, left to be re-educated by guards who beat and starved him. They told him his mother was a criminal. They forced him to call her the widow Capet. Eventually, the child began to believe it. When he died in captivity 2 years later, no one claimed his body. The little prince of France was buried in an unmarked grave, like his mother. The revolution had not only killed a queen, it had erased a family. But memory has a strange resilience. Even as propaganda painted her as a monster, her image began to soften. Women in secret began lighting candles for her. Old servants whispered her prayers in the dark. And then something unexpected happened. Painters began to paint her again, not as the glittering Queen of Versailles, but as a mother, a woman stripped of all power, holding her children close in a gray prison cell. These images, once forbidden, began to circulate quietly across Europe. The revolution wanted to erase her humanity, but in trying to destroy her, it accidentally immortalized it. Years later, Napoleon Bonaparte would order her remains to be found and reburied at the Basilica of Saint-Denis, alongside her husband, Louis XVI. When workers dug through the mass graves, they found her bones by the hairpins she still wore, rusted but unmistakable. Even in death, she was recognized by the details she once hid behind, fragments of vanity that had outlasted the revolution itself. Her name would travel far beyond France, across continents, across centuries. To some, she remained the symbol of decadence. To others, a martyr of monarchy. But to historians, she became something far more complex, a mirror of how societies break their own illusions, and the people trapped inside them. Marie Antoinette was not an angel. She was not a demon. She was human, born into privilege, destroyed by it, remembered because of it. And in that truth lies her quiet victory. For when the guillotine rusted, when the slogans faded, when the shouts of the mob fell silent, her story remained, fragile, tragic, unending. Because in the end, the revolution did not bury Marie Antoinette. It only carved her name deeper into history's heart. The blade was silent now. The crowds had gone home. And for the first time in years, the city of Paris slept, but not peacefully. The revolution had triumphed. The monarchy was gone. But victory brought no peace, only ghosts. In the weeks after Marie Antoinette's death, the guillotine stood idle for days, its wood dark with rain and something deeper. Some said the air itself felt heavier. The wind that swept through the Place de la Révolution carried not the scent of freedom, but of something lost. The silence of the city became unbearable. Even the revolutionaries who had demanded her death began to avoid the square at dusk. Because in the stillness, it felt as though she were still there, watching, forgiving, or perhaps judging. The months that followed became known as the Terror, a time when suspicion turned into law and justice was measured in executions. Friends denounced friends, voices fell silent in the night, and one by one, the men who had condemned her, Robespierre, Danton, Desmoulins, would all face the same blade they had raised. The revolution had eaten its children. For the ordinary people of France, life did not suddenly improve. Bread was still scarce. War drained the nation. The dream of liberty began to taste like ashes. Some began to ask quietly, had they killed a tyrant or a woman caught in the wrong century? In the small villages beyond Paris, peasants whispered her name again, softly, as one whispers a prayer. They told stories of her final courage, of how she faced death without trembling. Mothers spoke of her as a mother first, not a queen. In a way, Marie Antoinette became something no one expected, a symbol of dignity in defeat. Painters began to capture her image again, but differently now, no longer surrounded by pearls or fountains. Instead, she was painted by candlelight, her hands folded, her gaze distant, a soul waiting to be forgiven. Her portrait spread across Europe, quietly defying the Republic's silence. Each brushstroke seemed to ask, what if she was not the monster we were told? In Vienna, musicians wrote slow, sorrowful compositions dedicated to a queen without a crown. In England, poets described her as the white rose cut before spring. Even in America, newspapers spoke of her with pity. The same nation once inspired by France's Revolution now looked on with unease. The world had begun to understand. Revolution may destroy kings, but it cannot erase conscience. Inside France, her death cast a long shadow over those who survived. One of her former maids, Madame Campan, spent the rest of her life teaching young girls about grace and endurance, never mentioning her queen's name aloud, but wearing a small locket with a single strand of gray hair inside. The surviving nobles lived quietly under new names, waiting for history to forgive them. Some never spoke again. Others wandered through empty chateaus, dust collecting where laughter once echoed. Every mirror in Versailles seemed to remember her face. Years passed, empires rose and fell, and yet her story remained like a scar that France could not heal. In 1815, after Napoleon's fall, the monarchy returned, and with it, a quiet reckoning. King Louis XIV ordered the remains of his sister-in-law and brother to be found. When workers unearthed the bones from the common grave, the city fell silent once again. Her skull was identified by a small fragment of ribbon and 2 pearls. A priest who had once seen her alive whispered, "Yes, that was her." They buried her in Saint Denis Cathedral beside her husband in a ceremony of tears and whispers. And yet, even then, she did not rest. Historians debated her life endlessly. Was she cruel or simply blind to her people's suffering? Was she guilty of extravagance or only of being a foreigner in a land that wanted someone to blame? The truth, as always, lived somewhere in between. She was a young woman given power without preparation, trapped in a storm no one could control. A child bride turned symbol of everything wrong with the old world. A human face painted over with legend until no one could see the real one. Even today, her image survives, on film, in books, in the silent corridors of Versailles. Tourists walk through her rooms, taking pictures of the gold ceilings and chandeliers. Few realize that the same woman who once stood there in silk and laughter died barefoot in a wooden cart beneath a gray October sky. History remembers the spectacle, but it often forgets the heartbeat beneath it. The long night that followed her death was not just France's, it was humanity's. A warning about how ideals can become vengeance, how crowds can mistake blood for justice, and how sometimes the truest revolution begins not with a shout, but with a whisper of remorse. Marie Antoinette's story did not end at the guillotine. It began there as a reminder that every age must answer the same question. When justice turns to cruelty, who will speak for the condemned? Decades passed. The revolution became a story, a symbol, a myth. But myths have a way of hiding guilt. For years, France told itself that Marie Antoinette's death was justice, that her trial was fair, that her guilt was proven. But buried in the archives of the Republic lay another story, one far more human and far more painful. In the 1820s, historians began to unseal the revolutionary records. Among them were documents from the Tribunal of Paris, trial notes, witness statements, and confiscated letters. The paper had yellowed, the ink had bled, but the words were still sharp. They revealed not a trial, but a performance, a verdict written before the first question was ever asked. Marie Antoinette had been accused of high treason, of conspiring with Austria to destroy France. But the evidence was fabricated. Letters she never wrote, conversations she never had. The proof was built on fear and hatred, not fact. One file contained a report from the Committee of Public Safety. The widow Capet must die, not for what she has done, but for what she represents. It was not justice. It was purification, a ritual sacrifice for the sins of a dying order. Even more shocking were the testimonies that had been silenced. Several guards and clerks had written statements describing her final months in prison. They spoke not of arrogance or pride, but of suffering quietly borne. One guard wrote, "She wept not for her crown, but for her children. She prayed every night, not for herself, but for them." Another, a young soldier barely 20, confessed, "When I saw her walk to the scaffold, I felt my heart turn. I wished I had not lived to see it." They had been told to hate her. Instead, they pitied her. Then came the most haunting discovery of all, a letter written the night before her execution, addressed to Madame Elizabeth, her sister-in-law. "It is to you, my sister, that I write for the last time. I am calm, not because I am without fear, but because my conscience is at peace. I forgive my enemies. I die in the faith of my fathers, and I pray that my children will never avenge us." The letter was never delivered. The Revolutionary Guard who intercepted it kept it hidden in his family for 40 years, too ashamed to reveal it. When it was finally found, even hardened historians wept. It revealed a woman stripped of everything, title, wealth, dignity, yet still clinging to one final truth, her humanity. She had been broken, humiliated, defamed, but not destroyed. History had painted her as vain and heartless. But the letter's handwriting, small and trembling, spoke of tenderness, of a woman facing the end with grace that few soldiers ever mustered on a battlefield. As the archives opened, so did the memories. Old servants came forward with stories never told. Some remembered her laughter echoing through Versailles. Others remembered her tears when the mobs first entered the palace. One recalled a single sentence she whispered before they took her son. "They may take my crown, but they will never take my love." It was not something a tyrant would say. It was something only a mother could. By the mid-19th century, even France began to change its view. The plays, pamphlets, and songs that had mocked her were quietly forgotten. Writers like Lamartine and Michelet began to describe her differently, not as the Austrian witch, but as the tragic queen. In Vienna, her descendants commissioned statues not of her as a monarch, but as a mother holding her child, eyes downcast, unadorned, humble. The world had begun to understand. Marie Antoinette was not simply executed, she was erased, then rewritten. Modern historians now see her story as a warning, a case study in propaganda, in how public anger, when guided by fear, can destroy truth itself. In 1789, pamphlets had accused her of everything from treason to perversion. She became the perfect villain for a people searching for someone to blame. And when the time came, no defense could save her, because the verdict had been rendered long before the trial began. Even today, the echo remains. How easy it is to build monsters out of human beings. Yet, in the reckoning of history, truth often arrives too late. By the time the world realized what had truly been done to Marie Antoinette, the revolution had long since turned its blade on itself. Her death had not saved France, it had only proven how fragile justice can be when ruled by rage. And so she endures not as a warning against monarchy, but as a reminder of what happens when mercy dies in the name of purity. Today, her final letter rests in the French National Archives, preserved behind glass. Visitors lean close to see the faint lines of ink. Some smile sadly, some whisper prayers, some simply stare, unable to speak. Each word written in that letter is a quiet defiance against centuries of noise. In her handwriting, trembling and precise, history meets its reflection and asks forgiveness, because every age believes its justice is righteous until it reads the letters of its victims. History does not end with the fall of a blade. When the crowd dispersed, when the cheers faded into the Paris mist, something remained. Her name, her story, her silence. Marie Antoinette's death did not simply close an era. It opened a wound that France would carry for centuries. In the decades that followed the Revolution, France was reborn, but never healed. The same ideals that sent her to the scaffold, liberty, equality, fraternity, also tore the nation apart in endless waves of blood and vengeance. The revolutionaries who condemned her soon condemned each other. Robespierre, Danton, Desmoulins, all met the same fate. The guillotine became a mirror, reflecting every injustice it claimed to end. And in that reflection, her face remained. In 1815, when Napoleon fell and the Bourbon monarchy returned, the world expected vengeance. But instead, France fell into silence, a silence filled with ghosts. Portraits of the late queen reappeared in secret salons. Paintings once banned were quietly restored, and whispers spread through Paris that perhaps the queen had not been a monster, but a victim of a nation's rage. It was not forgiveness, it was realization. Artists, poets, and composers began to resurrect her image, not the powdered, laughing queen of Versailles, but the broken mother of the Temple prison. Painters captured her not in jewels, but in shadows, hands clasped, eyes closed, as though praying for the world that had betrayed her. Beethoven's mournful adagios, Delaroche's tragic portraits, Lamartine's elegies. All whispered the same truth, that she had become the first martyr of modern politics. Even in Austria, her birthplace, the legend grew. To her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, she had been a daughter of duty. To Europe, she became something else, a symbol of what happens when power forgets its humanity. Vienna placed a statue in her honor, not as a queen on a throne, but as a mother, holding the hand of a child who looked up in silent grief. No crown, no jewels, just sorrow, carved in marble. But history has a cruel memory. For every portrait of compassion, there was still a pamphlet of hate. For every scholar who called her a martyr, another still called her a monster. The truth, as always, lived somewhere in between. She was a queen who spent while her people starved, but also a girl married at 14, sent to a foreign court, used as a pawn in a political game she never understood. She was both guilty and innocent, both privileged and powerless, both adored and hated beyond measure. And in that contradiction lies her immortality. The echo of her death reached far beyond France. In the following centuries, every revolution, from Russia to Mexico, invoked her name, some as a warning, others as a lament. When Tsarina Alexandra was executed in 1918, the Bolsheviks mocked her as the new Marie Antoinette. When Queen Liliuokalani of Hawaii was dethroned, newspapers said she shared the fate of the Austrian queen. Her story had become a pattern, the symbol of every fallen monarch, every woman blamed for the sins of her empire. But perhaps the truest legacy she left was not political. It was human. Her death forced Europe to ask a question it had never dared before. How far will we go in the name of justice? Can a world fighting for equality still keep its humanity? Can freedom survive without mercy? Those questions began on a scaffold in 1793, and they have never truly been answered. In Paris today, near the Place de la Concorde, where she was executed, a small chapel stands, the Chapelle Expiatoire. Its walls are white, silent, almost cold. Inside, her name is carved in stone. Tourists walk through in quiet awe. Some bring flowers, some bring prayers, some bring nothing but silence. And if you listen closely, beneath the echo of footsteps and the hum of the city, you can almost hear her last words, "I forgive you." Words that history did not record, but humanity still remembers. Because Marie Antoinette was more than a queen. She was a mirror, reflecting the best and worst in us all. Ambition, vanity, love, fear, dignity in the face of ruin. The revolution sought to destroy her image, but instead it immortalized it. Every time we speak her name, every time we debate her guilt or innocence, we reopen that wound and remember what power does when it forgets compassion. Marie Antoinette, a name once shouted in hatred, now spoken in wonder. She began her life as a symbol of luxury and ended it as a symbol of loss. And perhaps that is why she still haunts us, not as a ghost, but as a question whispered through centuries. What would you have done if you had been her? This was not just the story of a queen's execution. It was the story of humanity's reflection in the blade of revolution.